Let's talk about Inside Out 2. Now, I love Pixar. I have ever since I first popped A Bug's Life into my VCR when I was knee-high to a pig's eye. But I have to be honest and say that for the last decade or so, I've been left disappointed by their films more often than I've been elated. Now, there are some exceptions, like Coco, but the vast majority of their recent releases have been one-and-done viewing experiences. The most consistent disappointments have been Pixar's sequels, like Finding Dory, Toy Story 4, and Incredibles 2, all of which have been blatant nostalgia-bait cash grabs with very little substance. Because of this, when Pixar announced that they were working on a sequel to 2015's Inside Out, I was understandably nervous. After all, they'd basically nailed the concept the first time around. And what more is there to say about a group of emotions that have emotions? Well, now that the sequel has been released, and I've actually watched it, I definitely have some thoughts, some positive, some negative. In today's video, I'll be discussing what I did and didn't like about Inside Out 2, and yes, there will be spoilers. I also want to say that I've only seen the movie once, so if I missed or misremembered something, don't freak out. Now let's get into it. Inside Out 2 takes place a year after the first film's conclusion. Riley, who is now 13, has fully adjusted to her life in San Francisco and is set to start high school in the fall. Unlike the first film, which focused on Riley's core memories and the respective islands of personality that were formed because of them, the sequel is all about Riley's sense of self, her inner voice that defines who she is as a person, with its current motto being, "I'm a good person." Things at headquarters are harmonious, with joy, sadness, fear, anger, and disgust working together to make Riley happy. Joy is still as controlling as ever, picking and choosing which of the memories are good enough to become a part of Riley's sense of self, even creating a contraption to toss the bad memories to the back of the mind to be forgotten. Riley and her two best friends, Bree and Grace, are headed to a hockey camp led by the coach of the high school team, but the night before, Riley's puberty alarm goes off. A demolition crew arrives at headquarters and upgrades the emotion console, warning the emotions that the others are on their way. Riley wakes up the following morning a teenager, complete with some bad BO and a batch of new emotions: anxiety, envy, embarrassment, and ennui. Riley's day takes a turn for the worse when she finds out that Bree and Grace will be attending a different high school, and her old and new emotions have different strategies on how to handle the situation. Joy wants Riley to hang out with her friends while she still can and have fun, while Anxiety thinks she should focus on joining the hockey team and befriend the team captain Val in order to ensure that she won't be alone when school starts. Over the course of the day, the differing groups of emotions continue to bicker, resulting in some pretty uncomfortable situations for Riley. Deciding that Riley's sense of self is holding her back, Anxiety sends it to the back of the mind. Then, she traps the old emotions in a glass jar and puts them in a vault filled with all of Riley's secrets. After the emotions escape the vault, sadness is sent back to headquarters, while the rest of the emotions go to the back of the mind to fetch Riley's original sense of self. Anxiety takes control of Riley and uses the negative memories she creates to start a new sense of self. As Anxiety continues to imagine worst-case scenarios, she resolves them in increasingly troublesome ways, leading to Riley stealing the coach's notebook, pissing off the other hockey players, and straining her friendship with Bree and Grace. All of Anxiety's meddling has created a new, corrupted sense of self: I'm not good enough. And this pressure eventually leads to Riley having a full-blown anxiety attack in the middle of a hockey game. When the old emotions finally reach the back of the mind, Joy finds all of the bad memories that she had thrown away. And after a brief cry about the difficulties of growing up, she realizes their importance. The quartet ride an avalanche of these bad memories back to headquarters, which has been thrown into a state of disarray, with Anxiety being frozen to the emotion console from overworking herself. Joy reassures her that it's okay for Riley to make mistakes and that they should remain hopeful about the future, not pessimistic about it. This snaps Anxiety out of her attack, allowing Joy to take over the console, just as Riley and her friends make up. The film then skips ahead to the new school year, with Riley hanging out with the hockey team, but still talking to Bree and Grace. Her new and old emotions are now at peace and work together to take care of Riley's ever-changing sense of self. As you can see, the film shares many of the same story beats as the first, just with a more obvious antagonist this time around. I felt like these similarities were most noticeable when the emotions were making their way through Riley's mind, as the trajectory of that journey was almost identical to the one in the first film. There were a few new punny locations, like the sarcasm and the stream of consciousness that I found clever, but the brainstorm and memory vault didn't really do it for me, especially the vault, which felt like a waste of time apart from introducing Pouchy, who was the most obvious deus ex machina to ever exist. I can appreciate the callback to Mickey Mouse Clubhouse and Dora the Explorer, but Pouchy is literally just there to help the emotions get out of trouble when the script couldn't think of a better way to do it. At least Bing Bong served a purpose besides getting Joy back to headquarters. I honestly wish that Anxiety had just sent them all to the back of the mind to begin with. Then their journey could have been focused on just getting back to headquarters, instead of wasting all that time running back and forth. The story would barely have to change, but you'd buy way more time to develop other aspects of the plot. The highlight of the film, and what allows it to stand out from its predecessor, is Anxiety. Not only is the character captivating, but they actually managed to handle a complex and sensitive issue pretty well. My only criticism in regard to Anxiety is that I felt as though they rushed to have her take over headquarters, when it would have been interesting to see her and Joy squabble a bit more, allowing the audience to better understand how the two are similar. Although Anxiety was a great addition, I wasn't sold on the rest of the new emotions. Embarrassment is probably the one that works best, mostly because their personality feels clearly defined, and their interactions with sadness were actually pretty cute. But Envy and Ennui just didn't do it for me, being pretty forgettable when compared to Anger, Disgust, and Fear's introduction. Although Envy was adorable, she was way too chipper and bubbly for me to see her as envious. I know that the main reason for that direction was to give Anxiety someone to play off of in headquarters, since Ennui and Embarrassment aren't big talkers, but I feel like they should have committed more to the jealousy angle. Considering Bree and Grace are heading to a different school together, why not have Riley be envious and anxious about that in addition to the possible loneliness? I know when I was a tween, I would have been worried about being the friend that was left behind, but Riley doesn't even think about that once. It would have been so easy to plant that insecurity if they had Envy comment, "Look at all of the fun they're having together. They don't even need us." Then have Riley respond by choosing to hang out with Val at camp instead of Bree and Grace. Then both Anxiety and Envy could drive Riley further away from her friends with thoughts like, "Oh, they like each other better than they like me. Oh no, do my friends actually hate me? Oh, they're just jealous that I'm hanging out with Val." Yada yada yada. Then when they actually make up at the end, it feels more earned, because Riley did more than just blow them off and make fun of a boy band. As for Ennui, I just found the character to be boring, which yes, is pretty ironic. I get that it's supposed to signify that Riley's starting to turn into a difficult teen, but it just doesn't feel like the type of personality that she would have to begin with. There's all of this lead up to Ennui's big, sarcastic moment, but it didn't even land for me because Riley had already been sassy in the last film, so why did we need Ennui? Her character design is also pretty derivative of Fear's, which I think could have been easily fixed by giving her a gray color palette, which feels more lethargic in the first place. Considering the last film ended with the message that emotions are more nuanced than we realize, I feel like it would have been interesting to introduce an emotion that had both negative and positive interpretations, like pride for example. Although being proud to the point of cockiness isn't exactly a great thing, there's also something to be said about having pride in yourself and your accomplishments, as it's one of the cornerstones of building confidence. If they had introduced pride as a neutral emotion at the start, then had them become more egotistical as Riley becomes more and more anxious, we could have seen pride prevent her from asking for help, or even making her act arrogantly in front of Bree and Grace. Then afterwards, Riley could swallow her pride, allowing her self-esteem to grow naturally as she makes her way through high school. Curiosity also could have been an interesting emotion to add, since adolescence is all about discovering who you are. It could start off more neutral, being interested in both Joy and Anxiety's ideas, but deciding to side with Anxiety at the end of the day. With Curiosity, you could have Riley ask way too many questions or poke her nose where it doesn't belong, making its connection to other emotions like embarrassment and envy stronger. From a character design standpoint, I also think that making Curiosity a cat would have been hilarious. I'm not against the idea of Riley being assigned a batch of new emotions. My only problem is that apart from Anxiety, they didn't add anything to Riley's personality that she couldn't get with her initial 5. But by introducing a more stereotypical Envy and Pride or Curiosity instead of Ennui, all of the new emotions would be able to interact with one another in a more meaningful way, which would create a larger variety of negative situations for Anxiety to freak out over. I also think it would have been interesting for the film to split the emotions up, not by whether they were old or new, but whether or not they fit into anxiety's plan, like kicking out embarrassment, disgust, sadness, and joy, but keeping fear and anger who could side with anxiety if they were convinced. I really enjoy seeing the emotions work together, like when embarrassment took over the console and sadness helped fill it up the rest of the way. It not only made these complex emotions easier to visualize for younger audiences, but also made the characters' interactions new and exciting. So it was a bit disappointing when they all got separated, since the new emotions just wound up working alone for the most part. So I think by switching up the pairings from the start, they could have made it more interesting. Considering sadness still has lingering feelings of being a failure, they could have tapped into those insecurities once anxiety takes over, incentivizing her to do more at headquarters than just hide and get captured. Although Joy treats sadness way better than she did in the first film, she does seem to have regressed a bit as a character, still trying to control Riley in the ways that she deems to be the best. This isn't a huge issue since she's once again meant to learn from these mistakes, but I think the setup could have been done better. You could still have Joy explain to the audience and the other emotions that she's been dumping the negative memories to the back of the mind, but give that decision more obvious repercussions. When the new emotions all arrive, they could have kept Joy busy with trying to clean up headquarters or something. Then have anger, disgust, fear, and sadness give the new emotions a tour. While doing so, they could tell them about only saving the good memories to help Riley, planting the idea in anxiety's mind. Then, when Joy makes it back to headquarters, she can realize that she's the reason anxiety has been doing all of this. Even though Riley starting puberty is the catalyst for the new emotions, apart from some stinky pits, it's barely a factor in the rest of the film, which is a shame because those awkward growing pains are something everyone can relate to. Part of the reason why I think the film wasn't able to focus on the puberty element is because of the hockey camp setting, which is honestly pretty limiting, as Riley can basically only interact with other teenage girls who love hockey. And I don't know if the message, you can only be friends with people who like the same things you do, is what we want kids to walk away with. I honestly would have loved if they'd put Riley in a normal co-ed summer camp, so we could see her interactions with potential crushes, bullies, and camp counselors, in addition to cool high schoolers and her current best friends. Speaking of her best friends, I think Bree and Grace needed a lot of work. I couldn't even describe any of their personalities or interests apart from what's identical to Riley. Considering Riley's anxiety attack ends with her confessing her worries to Bree and Grace, I wanted to feel their connection on a greater level to really understand how important they all are to each other. I actually think this was a side effect of the film's pacing, which rushed at times and lagged at others. We got a lot of time with the emotions and the hockey team, but Riley's friends fell by the wayside, when I think that that should have been the heart of the film, especially since family was the focus of the first. If you weren't a fan of Turning Red, then you might have some trouble with this film, as it has a very similar brand of awkward tween humor, which involves making weird faces while taking selfies and screaming over boy bands. But I personally think it works better in this situation, since they're actually trying to make you feel secondhand embarrassment for Riley. And my God, did they succeed. Considering all of the lackluster films that Pixar and their supreme overlord Disney have released in the last few years, Inside Out 2 definitely took me by surprise. And considering it's already a success at the box office, I'd bet that we're going to hear news about a third film sometime soon. Compared to The Incredibles or Finding Nemo, Inside Out feels like the type of story that you could keep expanding on forever. After all, we never stop learning and growing. If the first film was about family and the second film about friendship, I have to wonder if the next step in Riley's journey is love, and if so, what kind? What did you think about Inside Out 2? I hope you enjoyed this video. Don't forget to like and subscribe, and I'll see you soon. Bye!